This is Entertainment for Review, and as we have reached the Christmas season, I've decided that we need to do a Christmas movie review. So for today's review, we are going to be taking a look at the 1994 Christmas classic, The Santa Claus, starring Tim Allen. This movie would go on to spawn two sequels, The Santa Claus 2 in 2002, and The Santa Claus 3, The Escape Clause in 2006. And has most recently spawned a follow-up TV series that just completed its second season called The Santa Clauses. But for today, we are just going to focus on the original movie that started it all. This was one of my favorite Christmas movies growing up, and I still like to watch it every year in December. Used to have it on VHS tape and would watch it all the time, year-round. The movie features Tim Allen, who is playing a character named Scott Calvin, who starts off as a businessman for a toy company. And right away, there are some interesting parallels there. One, his name is Scott Calvin, which are the same initials as Santa Claus. And two, he works for a toy company, and he later becomes Santa Claus, who makes toys. The movie starts off with Scott Calvin having Christmas dinner with his son, Charlie, who doesn't seem too excited to be there. Also see Charlie's mother and Scott's ex-wife Laura and her new husband Neil. Scott and Laura have a disagreement right away about whether or not anyone should have told Charlie that there is or isn't a Santa Claus. When he's cooking dinner, he ends up burning it, so they end up going to Denny's for dinner instead, where they have a waitress named Judy. This is also noteworthy because later they meet an elf named Judy, and some of these similarities are used to cast doubt on Scott becoming Santa Claus. After reading Charlie a story and putting him to bed later that night, Charlie first and then Scott are awakened later by some banging coming from the roof. Scott runs out to investigate, where he sees the current Santa Claus up on the roof and he shouts at him to get his attention, thinking it's a burglar. This startles the Santa Claus, causing him to fall off the roof.
Hey, yo! What's up? Whoa!
And he shortly thereafter disappears, leaving only his suit behind. And Scott finds a business card in the pocket that says, if something should happen to me, put on the suit and the reindeer will know what to do. That's when they see that there is a sleigh and reindeer on the roof indeed, and a magical ladder appears, allowing Scott and Charlie to climb up to the sleigh. They're having an argument, and Scott ends up yelling, "Let's go," and the reindeer take off to the next roof. Scott Calvin then dons the clothes of Santa Claus and begins his task of delivering presents throughout the night on Christmas Eve. See a lot of Christmas magic happening here. He's floating through the air with his Santa bag, magically morphing to go down chimneys, even of houses that don't have fireplaces, and when this happens, one magically appears for him. He's a little abrasive to one of the kids, but he's probably in a little bit of shock, but he manages to complete all the deliveries, and when he tells the reindeer to take him home, they instead take him to the North Pole, which is his new home and their home. First, they think they're just in a cold, snowy landscape when an elf appears and activates a lift which lowers him down into Santa's workshop. It's here that he meets the elves, most notably the head elf named Bernard, who begins the difficult process of trying to explain his current situation to him.
Try to understand this.
And that's where we get to the title of this movie, because the title of the movie is The Santa Claus, and it's spelled C-L-A-U-S-E, which is not referring to the name Santa Claus, but to a legal clause, which at this point Scott did not realize he accepted. Bernard shows him the fine print on the business card that said when you put on the suit, the reindeer will know what to do. There's also some fine print around the edge that said by putting on the suit, you agree to forfeit your identity and become the new Santa Claus.
Means you put on the suit, you're the big guy.
Scott is of course very upset about this at first, doesn't really accept it. Bernard notes that he has 11 months to put his affairs in order and he's due back the following Thanksgiving. And they would ship him the naughty nice list to review at his home. He then meets Judy the elf, who brings him some hot cocoa and some new pajamas. This scene has a part that I'm always interested in. When they're in Santa Claus's room, it has a balcony that looks out over the North Pole. It's portrayed as kind of a large city under the ice, which I always thought would be cool to see more of. But they decided to change the setting a little bit when they get into the sequels, and it's portrayed as more of just a quaint village. I was always a little disappointed that we didn't get to see more of that city that we can see from the balcony in this scene. Also worth noting that while in the North Pole, Bernard gives Charlie a snow globe. It has some magical properties and comes into effect later. Scott and Charlie go to sleep in the North Pole, but when they awaken, they're back in Scott's house. Scott runs outside to check things out, but he manages to convince himself that this was all just a dream, although Charlie remembers it too, and he's touting it as very real. Something that immediately comes to the concern of Laura, Charlie's mother, and her husband Neil, to the point that they want Scott to tell him outright that it was all just a dream. He even brings his father to career day and tells the other students that he's Santa Claus. Scott tries to play it off as saying he's like Santa Claus, because his company sells toys. He's unable to unconvince Charlie, so he tells him that they need to keep it a secret. I always thought that Charlie's mother and stepfather were severely overreacting in this movie. Neil's a psychologist, so he might have played that up a bit. Most people would probably play it off as the child having an active imagination, but it seems like they're thinking that it's becoming a serious problem. And they probably could have just let it go for the time being, waited for Charlie to see if he grew out of it. For Scott Calvin, his troubles are just beginning. He starts going through a physical transformation, which is the sanification process. He starts putting on weight no matter what he eats, though he is craving a lot of desserts and milk. His hair is starting to slowly turn white, and he's growing a thick beard that no matter how many times he shaves, grows right back.
I shave in the morning, in the afternoon, I look like this.
This physical transformation causes more trouble with Laura and Neil because they believe that Scott is going so far as to change his physical appearance to feed Charlie's delusions. So they go as far as to go to a judge to ask that Scott's visitation rights with Charlie be terminated because they believe this to be in Charlie's best interest. Sometime after this, Scott violates the order and goes to see Charlie at Neil and Laura's house. Tells Charlie that he cares about him, but Charlie says that he needs to care about all the kids of the world, and he throws him the magical snow globe that Bernard had given him. This causes him to remember their adventure to the North Pole and finally realize the enormity of his situation.
Remember!
And come to terms with it. Here comes a potentially controversial part of the movie as Bernard shows up to take Scott back to the North Pole, and at Charlie's request, Scott takes Charlie with them as well. The night they leave is Thanksgiving night, and they don't come back till Christmas Eve, which leads them to believe that Scott kidnapped Charlie, which he technically did, and Charlie was a missing person for almost a full month, which is kind of downplayed. You show the authorities in the effort looking for Charlie, but they don't really talk about how long of a time period this actually is, which is good. We don't really need too much gloom in a Christmas movie, especially because Charlie was with his father, who is Santa Claus, and had the time of his life in the North Pole, helping them make some improvements to Santa's gear, including a new sleigh. And on Christmas Eve, they begin their journey to start delivering toys again. However, when they're at Neil and Laura's house, the police catch him and do place him under arrest, leaving Charlie stuck in the sleigh on the roof. So Bernard deploys the ELFS team, a specialty team of elves who use jetpacks, to fly down and first rescue Charlie from the sleigh and then go break Santa out of jail, which they do. Scott then takes Charlie back to Laura and Neil's house. As he's going to continue delivering toys, Charlie wants to come and he says that he thinks that Charlie should stay behind with Laura and Neil. Charlie gets upset, but Bernard reappears and says that as long as he has the magic snow globe, he can see his father whenever he wants. All he has to do is shake it. At this point, both Laura and Neil do begin to realize that he is truly the real Santa Claus. This causes Laura to give him a gift, which is to burn the court papers that took away Scott's visitation rights. However, that is not how legal processes work. She still needs to go to court to correct that. Burning the documents probably actually would just slow things down. But the message is clear and positive. She's less upset than you would expect for someone who just had their son kidnapped for around a month. Scott, or Santa, then heads it back out on his journey to deliver presents in front of a group of onlookers, including the police that are looking for him, some other people around the neighborhood, and some elves dispersed into the crowd. Before leaving, he drops some special gifts, a soccer ball for Charlie, and for Neil and Laura, some gifts that they've been wanting since they were children. And in the final scene, we see Charlie in the backyard shaking the snowball, wanting his father to come back, and he eventually does. And then he offers to take him for a ride, which Laura agrees to let Charlie go for a short ride. And then she gets worried and calls after them as they take off. And this is how we close the movie. I've always loved this movie. I feel like it has a lot of Christmas magic and comedy, and introduces a lot of cool ideas to the concept of Santa Claus. The important thing it introduces is, for the purposes of this movie, is that Santa Claus is not one individual person. He is, of course, one person at a time. As we see in the beginning of the movie, there was a Santa Claus. He fell off the roof and died, and disappeared like a Jedi fading into the Force. When Scott put on the jacket, he became the new Santa Claus. In the lore of this series, Santa Claus is not an immortal figure. Powers and persona of Santa Claus are, but they can be passed from one person to the next. This movie was pretty well received. On Rotten Tomatoes, it gets a 73% positive score on the tomato meter, and a 66% positive score from audiences, and over on IMDb, it gets a 6.6 out of 10. For me, this first installment is the best in the series, and is an all-time Christmas classic, and I score it at a 9 out of 10. We know your thoughts on 1994's The Santa Claus in the comment section below. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and keep an eye out for my next video coming soon.